Welcome to the High Museum of Art. My name is Julia Forbes, and I'm the head of museum interpretation here at the High. That means that my job is working on the products that you all need in the galleries to learn about the art. So I work closely in a team, really, with curators and designers and our exhibit folks, and we really work on the labels. I work on the audio tour. I train our docents who give all of the guided tours. So it's really very much about helping you all learn in the galleries. And tonight, I've been asked to focus on this fabulous painting up here by Edgar Degas that opens our Inspiring Impressionism exhibition. How many folks have had a chance to see the exhibition so far? Okay, great. Well, I'm going to make sure to wrap up in time tonight for you to have a little chance to get in the galleries if you haven't seen it, or maybe I've inspired you to go back for a second look. But the museum closes at 8 p.m. tonight, so I will make sure there's a little time at the end for you to have a chance to go up there and check it out. Now, I had the pleasure of working on the development of the Inspiring Impressionism exhibition, and it was really a team effort, not just here at the High Museum of Art, but with two of the collaborating institutions. This exhibition was organized by the Denver Art Museum, and working with us here at the High and with the Seattle Art Museum, folks we've been good partners with in the past. And it was really exciting to be able to go to Denver and to go to Seattle and work with all the curators and educators and designers at those various institutions to put the exhibition together. So it was a great, great experience. And so hopefully I have enough good ideas to share with all of you tonight. Now, let's just focus here a little bit on the work of art in question. So maybe we can have our lights down now, Kevin. I won't be able to see you all, sadly. All right. So this is a painting that was made by Edgar Degas in about 1885, and it's called A Visit to the Museum, Visit to a Museum. And it shows Mary Cassatt here and her sister Lydia seated, reading the guidebook. And there they are visiting the museum. It's one of the works that's a focus of one of the interactives in the exhibition. So if you haven't had a chance, and if you do get to go back to the exhibition, I encourage you to use our Touch of the Brush tables that are often one of the side galleries. And we've created, mainly the folks at the Denver Art Museum, created this really wonderful interactive where you can magnify the works of art. And this is one of the 7 Impressionist works of art that are on the table, so that you can look really closely and intently at the brushwork. So if you haven't had the chance to do that, maybe I'll inspire you tonight to go back up and take a close look. So let's start by getting to know Edgar Degas. He began being interested in painting at a very young age. In fact, by 13, his father was already taking him to visit all of the museums in Paris. And by age 19, he registered for the first time to copy at the Louvre. That was in about 1853. So he was already very busily engaging and looking at the art of the past and using the Louvre really as one of his places of learning. By 1855, he begins his formal studies at the École des Beaux-Arts and continues copying in the Louvre in the 1850s and the 1860s. We know, again, that he registered to copy, and that's one of these sort of odd things. You couldn't just sort of bring the palette and the brushes and the easel and head into the Louvre and set up shop. You did have to actually formally register, be approved by the Louvre Museum. You were given a specific date. You can come in on January 19th, and you would come in and set things up, and then you could copy. So it was a very formal process in the late 1800s, 19th century. And we know that in 1862, one of the times he registered to copy, 14th of January, that he and Manet actually met one another while they were painting a painting by Velázquez. So just this really wonderful environment of Impressionists going to the Louvre and copying and really learning from the masters, which is, of course, the core idea of the Inspiring Impressionism exhibition, the reason that we wanted to start the show with the wonderful visit to the museum. So Degas also studied outside of the Louvre. He traveled to Italy a great deal. He traveled to Spain, and he copied the old masters there. He went to the Uffizi in Florence. He traveled to Rome. He went into the Sistine Chapel to copy Michelangelo. So he was really looking closely at the art of the past to help to inform his own painting. And here's his good friend, Mary Cassatt, on the left. Degas was a real mentor and friend to Mary Cassatt, and we believe that they met in 1877. She actually had arrived in Paris in 1865. She studied in Philadelphia at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. For those of you who saw that Cecilia Beau show, I don't know, I'm just going to dip in a little bit into that. There was a real rivalry between these two. They both studied and worked in Philadelphia and were real rivals to one another. So just another connection to the High Museum of Art. She began copying in the Louvre, applied for her permits almost immediately after arriving in 1865, but didn't really catch Degas' attention until, as I said, 1877. She also studied, as Degas did, at the École des Beaux-Arts, and she exhibited for the first time with the Impressionists in their fourth exhibition, which happened in 1879. She said of Degas that he was a very isolated, very quiet person, but this wonderful quote, she says, when he came out of his shell, he could really be delightful. And Mary Cassatt, as you'll notice in this picture, wears some pretty amazing hats. We're going to see some more of them. This is quite a spectacular hat. And I can't tell you how many people have said, are you sure that that's not Judi Dench as opposed to Mary Cassatt? So I don't know if Judi Dench should maybe consider playing Mary Cassatt and whatever maybe fabulous biopic they could make about her. But these fabulous hats were actually inspired a great deal by Degas. He would take her to the millinery shop and he would recommend which hats she should purchase and which ones she should buy. So it was very much a very close friendship, not just about art, but obviously about more than that in their lives. And here's the quote that we chose to pair with the Visit to a Museum painting as the exhibition opens upstairs on the second floor. And it's very important because we feel it's a really important foundation for the exhibition. No art is less spontaneous than mine, which I think we're going to find as we look that maybe we don't agree with him. What I do is the result of reflection and the study of the old master. So he's one of the Impressionists who really acknowledges and is indebted to the art of the past and is very serious about his copying. I'm sorry about the next slide. I'm just apologizing in advance because I think it's kind of fuzzy. But this is a mural that we have up in the exhibition, so if you want to see the real detail, head up to the exhibition. But this is the Grand Gallery at the Louvre. And you can see all of these easels set up all along, tons and tons of people copying. There are wonderful books and images of how many people, I mean, the Louvre in the late 1900s was packed with people copying. You could just barely move to get through the galleries because so many people had set up their easels and were copying there. It was a real classroom for artists, and so many people flocked there to be able to study and learn. So this is a great example of that, and you can imagine Degas having made his registration to copy and set up his easel and copying in the galleries. And one of the things that he copied in the Grand Gallery of the Louvre was this painting here by Mantegna. This is Degas' copy, which is upstairs in the exhibition. I have to tell you, as a little personal aside, some of the docents here at the museum and I were in Paris a few weeks ago because we went on a special in-depth look at the Louvre, and we were on our guided tour of the Grand Gallery, and all of a sudden we found ourselves in front of this painting, and we all realized, oh my gosh, Degas' copy is back in our museum right now. What an incredible sort of moment. That's the kind of moment that gives an art history geek like me a bit of a chill, but really, really, really exciting. So you can see that what Degas is doing as he's looking at the art of the past, he's not trying to make an exact copy. He's trying to learn very specific things. So he's looking at the color palette, and in this case he's very interested in the arrangement of the figures. And certain groups are interesting to him, and he's taking those things, and then he uses them to his own advantage as he moves forward in his own art. All right, let's take a little bit closer look at the subject of our talk tonight, which is this fabulous painting by Degas. As I mentioned, he's painted Mary Cassatt and his sister Lydia. Mary walking along through the galleries looking very confident, very in control, and Lydia sitting looking closely at the guidebook and maybe looking up to hear something Mary Cassatt has said or looking up to look at the painting. One of the things that lots of people think about and talk about is, well, where is this taking place? Where in the Louvre is this happening? So I brought, oops, not the laser pointer, brought a little image of the Louvre here. We mentioned the Grand Gallery, so that's in the Daga wing, this long gallery through here. But a lot of people think that this painting might have taken place right down here in the Salon Carré, this little gallery that's just at the end of the Grand Gallery. Here's a painting from maybe about 1861, maybe 20 years or so before Degas painted the portrait of Mary Cassatt and Lydia. And you can see that at this time it was just packed with all kinds of wonderful masterpieces, including this really enormous painting by Veronese, Paolo Veronese, of the wedding feast at Canaan, a painting which is now in the same room with the Mona Lisa, for those of you who've been to the Louvre recently and may recall that. Now, the Salon Carré was one of the galleries that was very early opened at the Louvre, very soon after its public opening in 1793. And so they really did pack it with a lot of their treasures. And as you look closely, you might recognize things like the Mona Lisa that are in there, Virgin and Child with St. Anne, also by Da Vinci, Titian's Entombment, Raphael's Baldassare Castiglione, which was here at the High just about a year ago, the wonderful Tintoretto, and of course the gigantic wedding feast at Cana. Now, let's get a look at the painting again. Let's see if we all agree, because this is not a fact at all. This is just a theory. So you all could decide, I don't think they're right. I don't think they were in the Salon Carré. But let's examine a little bit. We've got this sort of velvety bench. We've got this huge painting that's hanging pretty low down. I'm going to go back for a second. Can I go back, Kevin? There we go. Okay. We've got red velvety benches. We've got this big painting that sits pretty low with a little painting right next, two little paintings right next to it. And here's what the painting looks like. Here's the wedding feast at Canaan. I mean, it's very specific and brightly colored. Oops, I brought a lot of pictures. Okay, so I got you just the bottom corner, which would match this little bottom corner. We can see that one of the things Degas is doing is he's not so much interested in an exact reproduction of what's happening in the background, so he is focused on his subjects here. But the question is, could he be representing that large painting? And one of the things that's interesting is, frankly, the wedding feast at Canaan is the largest painting, I think, or one of the largest paintings in the Louvre. And so it's a pretty good guess, I think. So you all will let me know if you think that that's where they are. A little twist and a little connection to Louvre Atlanta Year 2, because I can't help making all of these connections. This painting actually was brought to France by Napoleon, and when he brought all those wonderful spoils, including the Tiber, which sits over in our Anne Cox Chambers lobby right now. And like the Tiber, it did not get returned to Italy when all the spoils were returned in 1815, mainly because they thought it was too large and too fragile to make the trip. So a trade was done, and it was able to stay behind. All right. Now, the visit to the museum, in its simplest form, is not really meant to be a portrait of Mary Cassatt and Lydia. And I think we can tell that by the title he's given it, Visit to a Museum. It's really meant to be two elegant, sophisticated women making a visit to the museum. It is vibrant with energy and the brush strokes. That's why I encouraged you to go and use that touch of the brush table so that you can really see this wonderful brush strokes that he uses. They really just sort of dance across the surface. And it's hard to see it in an image like this, but if you go to look at the real painting or use that magnifier, you're really going to see the lusciousness of the brush strokes. And it's definitely worth your time to do that. And the old masters really do kind of become a blur in the background because it's very much about the looking. It's very much about being at the museum, but not specifically what they're looking at in this. Now, this belongs with a group of pictures, drawings, pastels that Degas did of in a lot of the literature. Fascinatingly, you see women visiting a museum, but we now know that it's definitely Mary Cassatt and her sister making that visit. And most of these were done between 1879 and 1885 when this final oil painting was done. So let's take a look at some of them and just sort of see how he got there. Because this first one was done in 1875. And you can see at first he's really focusing on, we're going to see a lot of Mary Cassatt's back, but he's very interested in the clothing. And this is one of the only times, interestingly enough, that we see Lydia with the guidebook not stuck right up in her face where you can barely tell who she is. Now, he did, I don't have all 20 of them, but he did at least 20 different versions, sketches of Mary Cassatt and Lydia at the Louvre. Here's Lydia again, seated. And it's very interesting how he keeps that book so close to her. Notice that's going to really be a common theme with Lydia, that the book is always there. Like, she's the less sophisticated visitor to the Louvre. She needs the guidebook. And Mary Cassatt, the more experienced artist who's traveling along and knows exactly what she's looking at. Now, this is kind of interesting because it feels like, here we go, that Mary Cassatt is just, as I was mentioning, completely at home in the museum. She's very absorbed in looking at every single image that we've seen so far. she's sort of unconsciously performing this really wonderful balancing act. I mean, the way he organizes her figure with this incredible sleek umbrella, we're going to see that as it goes along, but that's a real characteristic of these scenes of her from the back with her great hat and this beautiful sort of triangle that's created and this very elegant balance that she's doing with the umbrella. She's concentrating. She seems very intelligent. And she's a real pupil. You can feel that she's there at the museum studying. She's gone many times. She's looking. She has a specific purpose for being there. Whereas Lydia, who's sort of peeping over her book and always looking to the side, seems a little less sure of herself, a little less sure of why she's there at the museum. Here we see them at the Etruscan Gallery. And this is a very famous Etruscan work of art here. It's a sarcophagus of a husband and wife. So it was interesting in some of the things that I was reading in preparation for the talk today. It was saying that there was this sort of ironic juxtaposition of these two single American women, wealthy American women, at the museum looking at this ancient Etruscan work of art of matrimonial bliss and harmony. Here's this couple who's, going to their death together. They've died and they're in eternity together. But yet here are these two single, available was a word that they used, wealthy women looking at the portrait. And again, there is our friend Lydia with her sort of flattened hat hiding behind the book, and Mary with that wonderful umbrella. And these figures, as he goes through all of these different drawings and different manifestations of this scene, we begin to feel, and I wonder if you're feeling this way now, that they're almost like cutouts. He can sort of move them around from space to space, from gallery setting to gallery setting, and they're feeling very flattened and very like he just can switch the umbrella from this side to that side. He can reverse the pose. So you wonder, how many times did she actually pose for him? She talks about actually remembering posing for him at the Louvre and being there with the right outfit that he had asked her to wear. And so it's a very specific memory for her. But you wonder how many times she actually did it, for how many times he actually uses the pose. Now, one of the women who would sell Mary Cassatt her hats at the millinery shop says about this image of her with the umbrella, she says, the movement of the hand that places the hat upon the head, so she's thinking of what happens at the millinery shop, and her pose as she leads upon the umbrella is very characteristic for her. So she's feeling that Degas has really captured something that's quintessentially Mary Cassatt, that's really very much her. And this image of her, seen from the back, which we've seen several times now, is really quite celebrated and really unusual, because it's quite shocking, actually, to be showing this woman so many times seen only from the back. We're not seeing her face. We're not seeing her from the front. It's not really about it being Mary Cassatt so much it is about it being a woman who's at the museum spending time and looking. So it was shocking. It may not feel so shocking to us today or so unusual or odd, but it was really shocking at the time to show someone only from their back. And he was one of the very first people who was doing this kind of thing. You see her alone this time, just looking up. I have to tell you, I debated whether or not I thought this was Mary Cassatt or Lydia, because they're wearing such a similar outfit in all of these. They both have kind of a vest on and a skirt, but I think that hat is more of a Mary Cassatt hat, and I saw in a lot of the literature that they believe this is Mary Cassatt as well. All right, I want to talk a little bit about Degas and women, because this was a really important subject matter for him. In fact, 3/4 of the works that Degas ever made are of women. And when you sit down, you sort of think about what you know about Degas and what you've seen, you start to realize, wow, yeah, I guess 3/4 of his work really is about women. It was really interesting to him. And he used all types of medium. He did prints, he did drawings, he did pastels, oils, sculptures. Think about the wonderful Degas Little Dancer. So it was really a wide range. And some scholars have proposed, I'm not sure it's exactly true based on what I looked at, but I thought it was an interesting suggestion in an exhibition they did a few years ago about just Degas and women, was that he actually sort of categorizes the portraits of women with the medium. So he's using prints and monotypes for women of a lower class, like the Laundress that I'll show you in a little while, whereas for women of a higher rank that are of his own social class, he's painting in oil on canvas. And we'll see a lot of sort of working women and the ballerinas, they're in pastel. And so as they got them all together, they really did seem to feel that there was this sort of hierarchy between class of woman and type of medium that was happening. So something to think about and look at. And I'm not convinced it's exactly true, and they aren't convinced it was something that he consciously did, but it does seem to exist in a lot of ways. Okay, good. So let's look at a series of some of the portraits that he's done of women just to get a look. This is very much a sketch where he's trying to get a type, women that he's going to use over and over again in different formats. And in the center is Mary Cassatt. She's posing here. You see that famous umbrella that we've seen so many times. And she's seated. She's got that crazy hat on. So this is a type. These are women he's going to use in different formats, and he's trying to get just a structure of them. Here, Mary Cassatt is posing for him again. Here she is as a woman at the millinery shop. She's not really meant to be Mary Cassatt here. She's meant to just be a modern woman at the hat shop trying on her hat. And then, of course, we have the ballerinas. And one of the things that's really interesting is sort of a whole psychology grows up around Degas and portraiture. And, you know, the Impressionist group was full of writers as well as musicians and painters. And so there's kind of this interesting person who was very good friends with Degas and wrote about him a lot. And this is one of the quotes that he uses when talking about Degas and the way he paints women in particular, but how he feels about the gestures that Degas uses. He says, in a back, like we saw with the early Mary Cassatts, we want a temperament revealed and an age, a social standing. In a pair of hands, we must express a magistrate or a shopkeeper. In a gesture, a whole series of emotions. So there's a lot of emotion that's going on in a lot of these paintings that is about mood or just sort of the physical feel of the person and what they're doing. And then we see this monotype, this etching of a laundress. You see her here. And so I've tried to match up the medium with the subject matter, just as those scholars had said. Now, this is an interesting painting. This is, again, another time where Mary Cassatt is being used as the model, but she's really not meant to be Mary Cassatt. Here she's a fortune teller, which is a really very low class of people. Fortune tellers were kind of along the same lines as a prostitute, and I wanted to let you know what Mary Cassatt thought about this painting. It's one that she didn't really want sold. When she found out it was being sold, she said, well, it has some qualities as art, but it's so painful, and it represents me as such a repugnant person that I would not want it known that I posed for it. So she was trying to be a good friend and a good mentee and be there and pose for him and help him, but some of them she wasn't that wild about, and this is an example of one that really didn't make her very happy. And then we see Degas with women using sort of the visual experience. He was really very interested in looking and being looked at. Observation in the late 19th century was really equated with intelligence. So people looking closely, observing, as Mary Cassatt and Lydia are when they're at the Louvre. And these women with field glasses are really a good example. They're a little bit eerie how they directly look straight out at you. And there's a large series of them where he has these women just looking straight out at you. And for these kind of portraits, we're always seeing him using women of his own class, not seeing women of a lower class in these sort of looking positions, including this, where you see this young woman actually looking at her own self in a mirror. So we're seeing her reflection looking at us, but what she's doing is really looking. So it's really meant to make you think and engage with the composition. And then we see Mary Cassatt picking up on some of these ideas, and here's her own version of a woman looking at the opera in 1879. Oops, sorry. Okay. So the final thing that I really wanted to talk about tonight was Degas' connection with modern life. We hear a lot about the Impressionists and that they were painting modern life, and, you know, what did that really mean? And we hear about Monet, well, he painted trains full of steam engines, and they painted new metal bridges. And for Degas, though, modern life was about the everyday person. It was about making a portrait that wasn't Mary Cassatt and Lydia at the Louvre, but that was a visit to a museum, that was separating the person, really, from the activity, because for him the activity is what's important, showing modern people doing everyday things. These are women at the Louvre having a visit to the museum, or they're a man, for example, moving sort of out of the composition. All of these works of art, almost all of his work, you feel like the people could get up and move out of the composition at a moment's notice. You definitely feel that here. Mary Cassatt's moving. I feel that sense of movement. She's passing behind Lydia. She's moving along. She's looking at the painting, and she's moving on to the next one, just as this one. So this idea of cropping, the way he sets the figures, gives us that sense of mobility. And then, of course, the famous horse paintings. We see a lot of the jockeys. They're also always cropped. They're just coming into the frame, or they're just heading out of the frame. All of these things are really characteristic of the kind of work that Degas did, and made him such a genius, really. Made him the kind of person who so many people were inspired by, including his mentee, Mary Cassatt. Now, I've tossed out all kinds of different ideas tonight. I wanted to give you a real range of different things to think about in terms of this painting, and a lot of different ways to think about it. The specificity of who it is, which gallery it's in, the idea of how Degas created a composition, how important women were as subjects for him. And now I want to have a chance to talk with all of you. Maybe we can have some questions and discuss a little bit what you all think about this, and then make sure you have a little time to head up into the galleries and see the painting again before we close at 8 o'clock. So Lauren's got a microphone, and maybe, Kevin, we can have some lights so I can see everybody. We'll just keep Mary Cassatt and Lydia up there.
Just raise your hands and I'll come to you.
Anybody? Have inspired anybody with a question?
I've read and I think been told that photography was an influence on his cropping. Is that the
I think
case?
that's true. I think that's an element of it, absolutely. Sort of catching a snapshot of life. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one element, but I think he also felt really strongly that the cropping gave you the sense of something's about to happen, something different is going to happen. But photography was inspirational to him. I've read a lot of that too. Anybody else? I inspired you so much.
Do you know what the relationship between Mary Cassatt and her sister was?
In terms of, you mean how close they were?
You get a feeling Mary was the leader, to say the least.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think for a lot of it, at least the way Anne Dumas, the curator of the exhibition, the way I've heard her speak about Mary Cassatt and her sister is that, she needed to have someone with her. You couldn't just, as a woman in that time frame, just be going off to the Louvre and hanging out with all of these people without a chaperone. And I think Lydia was really there to allow her to do all the things that she wanted to be able to do. So, I mean, she couldn't go by herself just to the Louvre. She had to have someone with her. And I think Lydia was that person. So, does that help?
I had once heard that Degas really wasn't very fond of women, even though he painted them as subjects so frequently. And I was wondering if you have any scholarly input on that.
I read a lot of books in the last few weeks, and in specific one that was a catalog just about Daga and Women and all of his paintings of women. And nowhere did they say that they felt that he disliked women in any way. Now, I did read a lot about him being a real introvert, being somebody who really kept to himself. And as Mary Cassatt says even herself, when you could get him to come out of his shell, he was pretty delightful, but he was pretty closed. So, I mean, there are certain images later in his life that, are certainly not very complimentary of women. There's a whole series of prostitutes that's just really can be a little bit shocking even to look at. But I'm not sure that's about so much how he felt about all women. So, but I didn't see any generalization or statement like that in anything that I read in the last few weeks. So, anybody else? All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and I hope that you go up there and see it one more time.